You're listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889.
Thank you for listening to Community Forum. My name is Johnny Chandler. I'm the owner of KCCC 930 AM, the host of Community Forum. With me today, a repeat guest, our friend Paul Gessing. Paul Gessing is the president of the Rio Grande Foundation. How are you doing, sir?
Doing very well. I'm glad to be back with you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. I'm glad you're back with us as well. You're the man that keeps us up to speed on what everybody in Santa Fe is doing. I've lived here in Carlsbad over 3 years now, and I could tell you the longer you live here, the more disconnected you feel from anything along the Rio Grande Valley. You know what I mean? And all the way up to Santa Fe. It's easy to get disconnected when you're this far away from everybody up there. So we appreciate you keeping us updated. So why don't you just go ahead and take the steering wheel and let's get talking about it.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, unfortunately for folks in Carlsbad, which is a much more conservative area of the state, as is the rest of the Permian Basin here in New Mexico, you're governed by people who do not share those conservative principles. And that, starting off, includes Governor Lujan Grisham, who put out her new budget, her proposal for fiscal year 2026. I know that sounds kind of crazy. We're not yet into 2025, but the way the fiscal years work, the budget that will be passed in this upcoming legislative session will be for fiscal year 2026, which will start July 1st of this coming year. So right around the corner. And the main thrust behind this budget, first and foremost, is, as usual, the oil and gas money that does come to Santa Fe, comes to our state from Southeast New Mexico. Yet another banner year for the industry. According to the latest analyses by the Legislative Finance Committee, the state will take in $13.6 billion in the fiscal year 2026 from oil and gas. So, yeah, another very big year, another huge amount of money for this legislature to play with and the governor to play with. So her budget came out, and yet again, no tax reductions. The governor has decided that she and the legislature are going to hang on to every last cent of that money. The plan is to spend $10.94 billion, up from around $10.2 billion last year. So about a 7% rate of growth there in what the governor wants to spend on our state. And yeah, it's frustrating.
So Paul, let me ask you a question. So
yeah, go ahead.
You said that the oil and gas revenue, we're taking in 13 point some odd billion, right? Just from oil and gas alone. 13.6 billion, right? And so the budget is 10.94. The proposed budget is 10.94 billion. So our entire state budget is covered in 1 year by oil and gas.
It's been covered in recent years, and this is kind of one of the things that we look at when we talk about the budget. We say, well, we've got more than enough money for the oil and gas, and by more than enough, I mean, do the math.
Yeah, right, by like $2 extra billion.
13.6 minus 10.9. Yeah, you're talking just under $3 billion in excess revenue just from the oil and gas industry alone. Unfortunately, that's not the way New Mexico's budgetary process works. We're looking at putting a lot of this money aside, as is typically the case. Not something that I think makes a lot of sense, although unfortunately over the years, a lot of my Republican fiscal conservative friends have gotten caught up in saying, putting this money aside is a good thing. Well, when the alternative is to spend it, yeah, I suppose it's better than just spending it all. But if the alternative is, as it should be, at least somewhat reducing our tax burdens, because of course we're still being taxed. So this 13.6 billion generated by oil and gas is not the sum total of New Mexico revenue. You've also got the billions of dollars that we contribute with our taxes that we pay. New Mexico, as you can see, the Mexico government is just awash in cash still, yet again, shows no signs of changing. Obviously, the governor's spending increasing portion or plans to increase the portion allocated to government, but a lot of the balance will be allocated to these permanent funds, which are simply future spending by the state of New Mexico. So don't let them fool you. It's all spending all the time up at Santa Fe.
Well, I guess out of all the years that I've been talking to you and interviewing you for the show, I guess the way that you put it, the way that we put it today, or the realization that I'm having today is going to be, I guess, different than the past. So, like, based on how much oil and gas money we brought in, we don't have to pay taxes at all, Paul, and still have more than enough money to run the state and pet projects. Am I looking at that wrong?
Yep. If New Mexico allocated all of this money to the general fund, and that was the sum total of the way we budgeted, that would be more than enough money to pay the entire freight of New Mexico government.
Well, and we have a huge permanent fund already, right? So how big is our permanent fund currently?
$58 billion in total, and that's not including things like the $6 billion in unspent capital outlay money that we have sitting around as well. New Mexico has pots of money that I don't know about, that a lot of people who analyze New Mexico government can't keep track of, because with the money we've had flowing in from oil and gas, the tendency has been to stuff the money under the mattress. That's because the progressives and the liberals, the Michelle Lujan Grishams of the world, they've kind of run out of ideas. They've been in control of New Mexico government for the better part of 100 years, but this governor has had a Democrat progressive legislature for the 6 years that she's been in office, and she'll have another one for the next 2 years that she's in office. So they haven't really struggled to implement their policy ideas, and they've kind of just run out of ideas that they're able to carry out. And what they should be doing is returning the bulk of that money to we, the taxpayers of New Mexico. I can understand why they don't want to eliminate all the taxes that we pay.
Yeah, oil and gas isn't always going to be a banner year. You know what I mean? Yeah. Eventually, it's going to be a downturn. You can't get rid of all of it.
The personal income tax, which is somewhere around $2 billion, in addition to the the gross receipts tax, which is over $2 billion, and then corporate income taxes and other various taxes. We should be having serious conversations in Santa Fe right now about how we grow our economy, how we use this money to better our state, and not how much more we can pile under the mattress for future government spending. So I know it's a tough thing you get a lot of numbers, and even people who are really smart like yourself, and even myself, it took a while to kind of read through all of this and see just how big this entire oil and gas boom that we're seeing really is. But yeah, New Mexico's just awash in cash, and nobody has a vision, certainly in the majority, the Democrats, and to an extent, the Republicans should be more aggressive in messaging on this. I thought that during the recent elections, both this year and 2 years ago, I felt like Republicans needed to really make it clear that the other party, the Democrats, who they're running against, are holding this money and keeping it away from average New Mexicans. It's a classic case of we know better than you do.
It's frustrating. It's actually depressing. I would say we should move on to a happier topic when it comes to New Mexico state government, but unfortunately, I don't think there is one. Unfortunately, yeah, I was just like, but that's so disappointing as much money as we pay in taxes. I just feel like we're being taxed to nothing. Right? My wife and I really like to go to Italy. We know Europe has high taxes. And then you come to the U.S., and you know what? It feels like you're paying the same amount of taxes, but getting a lot less. It doesn't feel like we are a country with low taxes any longer compared to the rest of the world, but I don't feel like we're getting anything as a result of it either. Worldview will change your perspective a little bit about how you think America just does everything the best, It's not
Yeah,
always
the
the case.
U.S. situation is obviously a lot different, although it's worth discussing briefly. The big difference between the U.S. federal budget and New Mexico budget. One is that, of course, the federal government is in a deep financial hole. We have huge indebtedness, $37 trillion and growing. Also, of course, a big, quite honestly, much more than half of what the federal government does is merely shifting money around in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And those programs, are not very effective, for lack of a better word. Our healthcare is in crisis, just as it is in many of the countries that have nationalized healthcare. But we spend a huge proportion of money on it. I'm not a proponent at all of nationalized or federalized healthcare. We should peel back a lot of the government regulations and government programs. Medicaid, of course, is a program that is geared towards the poor, and New Mexico has the biggest percentage of its population on Medicaid, and we'll talk in a few minutes about a plan that is going to be introduced in this legislative session to further expand Medicaid. But yeah, the federal government and hopefully Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, and others will really focus on reducing spending in Washington, because these entitlement programs, which I just mentioned, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, need dramatic reform, as does the rest of the federal government spending. And yeah, we tax the high income levels heavily. The rest of us get off with relatively low taxes, but what we get for our money is very much open to question at the federal level. And so that's going to be, with the new administration in Washington, something interesting to watch and something that could impact New Mexico, because we are one of the heaviest states when it comes to federal spending as a percentage of our economy. And that could have ramifications for us here in New Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's the case if they shrink the federal government, but I would also say that New Mexico with nuclear as well as space, all those two things being very important, I can just envision that there'll be some additional funding in those areas while they might pull back on a little less. But I think our state's probably a little too critical to pull up too much federal funding from it, unless they decide to get political about it.
Yeah, and we'll see. That's one thing that you can certainly argue that if Trump was as vindictive as the left portrays him, then he would come after funding for New Mexico and other deep blue states. And New Mexico has a lot of money that flows in here. And I would encourage the president to take a very careful approach to New Mexico's federal funds and the way they're spent. Obviously, there are things that fit with the Trump agenda, certainly military installations. One can argue about the national labs and whether they fulfill their mission, which is more oriented towards national security, or whether they've strayed from them. That's something that they're going to have to take a closer look at. But New Mexico is vulnerable, and it's something that we'll see what the next administration does. But in the first 4 years of Trump, he really grew government, and that was before COVID really caused a mind-blowing explosion in government spending with all of the bailout programs that were enacted during that time. So hopefully no more global pandemics. Hopefully spending is restrained in a thoughtful way with this administration.
Yeah. You mentioned something about a Medicaid expansion that you expect to see coming up in the legislative session this year. Why don't you dive into that?
There's a lot of plans that have been embarked upon or discussed in the last session. Of course, a 30-day session. It's tough to really pass things so because of the time. But now there are going to be a flood of bills in the 60-day session, which is coming up in January, starting on the 21st, because this is the open time. This is the time when you can put any priority out there, no matter how crazy or harebrained it may be as a legislator. And especially if you're on the Democratic side of the aisle, you will get a bit of a hearing on that particular issue. So what I'm referring to is a plan called Medicaid Forward. This was originally introduced in the 2023 session, so the last 60-day session. It was introduced as a study, and the study was done ultimately, and they came back. And of course, when you pick the right people to do your study, it makes it look like Medicaid Forward would be the greatest thing since sliced bread. But basically, New Mexico's already the most dependent state in the country on Medicaid, one of those federal programs that I just referenced earlier. The federal government picks up the tab for about 80% of Medicaid spending in the state. It's one of these entitlement programs that I think need fundamental reform. And the legislature in New Mexico, the Democrats, seem to be inclined to expand further that dependency on Medicaid. Of course, federal government picking up at least a part of the tab. So basically eliminating income requirements on Medicaid and allowing people to buy in essentially to this new Medicaid program. So we don't know exactly what the contours will look like. I haven't seen a bill for this coming session, but the idea is to allow more people to, get onto a government welfare program for purposes of their health care, and not at all a model that we would like to see at the Rio Grande Foundation. We want fewer people on government welfare programs, but this would result in a significant expansion of that Medicaid welfare program if it's adopted. And I think there's a fair chance that it'll happen. But that's one of the big issues that we'll be working on in the 2025 session.
Well, is there a significant number of individuals that are gainfully employed yet unable to receive health insurance or health care at an affordable rate to where the state feels like there's a pool of people that they can fill that gap for? I mean, isn't that what, like, when you look at it that way, isn't that what it's designed to be?
Yeah, Medicaid is geared towards low-income folks across the country. States have some freedom to increase their income limits and their generosity of benefits. In fact, New Mexico has recently attempted to, as a part of this whole effort to attract more medical professionals, increase reimbursement rates, because doctors will say that they always get a low reimbursement rate from the Medicaid program.
Right.
But yes, there's income limits on this program currently in New Mexico. It's 200% of the federal poverty threshold. That would those folks who make more than that 200% would be allowed to, like I said, buy in some way to the Medicaid program. I think healthcare and the problems in healthcare are real in America, in New Mexico, but allowing people who clearly have the means to afford medical care, at least as good as it can be. I can't account for rural areas not having enough medical providers. That's nothing in this legislation is going to do anything about that. In fact, it'll make the medical provider shortage worse, because once you put people on a government welfare program, they're more likely to go ahead and take advantage of that benefit, especially if they're paying for it in some way out of pocket. So I would expect that medical provider shortage will be more pronounced.
Right. I don't want to sound rude about this, but I am going to.
Because you're not doing anything on the supply.
Right. I don't want to be rude about this, but I am going to say that I've never understood people that would go to like the emergency room or urgent care for a cold or something like that. Like I've always felt like the idea behind going to the hospital at all is you've exhausted every other over-the-counter sleeping chicken noodle soup remedy that you possibly could, you know, before you decided to take that leap into the emergency room. But I know individuals that they, at the sign of a sniffle, they're in like urgent care or something. You know, I just find that very interesting, knowing that as humans, you're going to catch things, or you're going to get a little bit sick, and chances are you're going to get over it. So the idea that these people are in the emergency room all the time for these little things confounds me. I just don't understand it.
Well, obviously, the healthcare issue and the way American healthcare works, and there's no perfect system. There are some systems that work better than others, but government, just because it's not a single payer system like they have in Canada or the UK, plays a tremendous role in American healthcare between Medicare, which is for the elderly, and Medicaid, which is for the poor. Sometimes there's crossover between poor people who are also elderly who get Medicaid benefits as well. So there's a lot of problems with American healthcare, and people who don't value it or don't understand because they're not really paying for it. It's really a classic problem with American healthcare. We need to reevaluate the third-party payer system, the way our government health programs work, and try to create a value proposition in American healthcare. Of course, we also need to reduce the burden of occupational licensure. We need to increase the use of telehealth that kind of caught on during COVID. There's a lot of issues in American healthcare, and I'll just note as a side conversation, I had a conversation with Fred Nathan of Think New Mexico for our podcast. Think New Mexico and Fred Nathan are kind of what I would call a more centrist oriented think tank, but their big project for this year is the medical provider shortage. Now, that was introduced in some substantial ways in 2023. There's obviously a long way to go here in New Mexico, and I think New Mexico has some additional ideas that are in many ways similar to what we've talked about on the medical provider shortage. So there's a lot of aspects of American healthcare. And of course, we saw with the assassination of United Healthcare CEO in New York City in a few weeks ago that American healthcare and healthcare issues remain very front and center in Americans' minds. And I'll just conclude that little conversation by saying, Obamacare did not solve or even really attempt to solve American healthcare issues. That is the largest recent kind of reform effort at the federal level. I said at the time that it didn't. A lot of other analysis at the time was done to show that Obamacare was going to only further worsen some of the worst aspects of American healthcare. And I think this issue is going to be around for a very long time until America and New Mexico embrace a more free market approach to healthcare issues. But we don't show any signs of doing that, unfortunately.
All right. So for now, you just get to do your best to lobby to prevent it from expanding, to prevent it from moving farther forward than it is. Because it's one thing to say that we're going to do this, or it's one thing to have the ideological thought of how healthcare should work in the state. It's another at this point for us to just be like, please don't expand it and make it worse.
Exactly.
We talked a little bit before we started recording, of course, and you mentioned something about the University of New Mexico football coach, former football coach now, Bronco Mendenhall. And I'll tell you a quick story before I'll let you jump in on that. Is when he was first hired as head coach, he did a statewide tour, basically trying to sell the state on the UNM football team again. He came down, he spoke to business leaders and such. I got to be a part of that group here in Carlsbad. And he spoke for about an hour and a half, Paul. And I tell you what, the guy was so motivating. He was so organized. You could just tell he had a winning mentality. I think every single one of us left that room ready to suit up and root for UNM, even though most of us did not go to UNM. Not really part of it. A lot of New Mexico State University people down here, a lot of Eastern New Mexico University people down here, such as myself. So when the coach left, it was heartbreaking, but not really, because I guess from our perspective, and you'll probably agree with me on this, it was just almost expected.
Yeah, it was expected in a sense because New Mexico is going to always suffer a great hill to climb when it comes to especially football, because, and I think we talked about this 6 or 9 months ago, because college football has always been a numbers game in terms of finances. You need a excellent and robust corporate climate in order to get kind of money that makes even traditional, throw NIL and all the recent changes where they're paying college football and college athletes. But you need that corporate structure, that corporate community to pay the bills, to bring in those dollars. And New Mexico is not able to compete with more free market, more private sector oriented states. Why are we not able to compete? Well, Bronco Mendenhall, the former Lobos coach, just took a job with the third biggest college football program in the state of Utah. Utah is a state of four corners, just like New Mexico. Obviously, it's grown, it's increased its size, and its economic dynamism is really unparalleled among U.S. states. It's one of the very most entrepreneurial and successful states. But they have BYU, they have University of Utah, and then Utah State, which is where Bronco Mendenhall went. Same conference as the Lobos, at least it was, and just a school that is in many ways an upstart, even relative to UNM. And now, the point I try to make with all this is not that we're going to start a sports talk segment at our podcast. It's to reach out to people who may care and may want to see New Mexico or New Mexico State succeed in these sporting events and their athletic programs. Understand that we need policies. We need to reform the policies that we have in our legislature, in our economy, to make New Mexico more competitive, less reliant on the government. And I always tell people the Sandia National Labs aren't going to support your kids' T-ball team or Little League team. They're also not going to pay NIL money to these college athletes. And whether it's football or basketball, where at least the Lobos and Aggies have traditionally done a little bit better, we face a large challenge with the influx of NIL money and other financial needs and demands for these athletic programs. So if we want our sports programs to be competitive, we need an economy that's more competitive, which gets back to some of those tax reductions and reforms that we could and should be enacting thanks to the oil and gas money flowing into New Mexico.
Yeah, I was just 100% not surprised. It's absolutely economical. It could also be, I think, the idea of when he introduced his whole team to us, when he came and spoke to us, like the whole team, photos of everybody. It's like the same 18 to 20 people that travel with him with every program he's ever gone to. He creates a team and they move from one university to the next. And I just don't feel like his team was a good fit for Albuquerque as far as feeling they had the way that families grew up in Utah. I'm not sure that they felt like it was a great place to raise a family. I don't know why I'm not just saying that blatantly. I lived in Albuquerque for a long time.
Absolutely the case. And if anybody has ever gone to UNM's campus, they know that it's right there along Central, one of the most troubled roads in all of New Mexico. UNM has a spot there on Central that's nicer than many parts of Central. But yeah, Albuquerque, the school system, the crime issues, those are what I would call second or third order problems. I mean, they are more critical in a sense, but their solutions are also more critical in the sense that how do you solve our crime issues. Well, I know it can be done. Part of it is just a prioritization and a willingness to elect politicians that will take crime seriously. Our education system also challenging, but something that if you're a coach, an assistant coach, you want to send your kid to good schools and have those schools available to you. We don't have that quite as much as certainly Utah and other states, but I think a lot of these problems can be immediately addressed financially just by getting our economy diversified, bringing more jobs, more economic investment to New Mexico. And if we did that, you would see the results very, very quickly and very, very favorably. But we haven't done anything with that oil and gas money of substance. Nothing that anybody is going to take note of in another state and say, heck yeah, I'm coming to New Mexico. They're open for business. They're ready to, create jobs and help me create prosperity and a business here in the state of New Mexico.
Right. Well, Paul, we're just about out of time. I thought there was maybe one more topic that you wanted to touch on, California RV related. Let's definitely have you touch on that before we sign off.
Yeah, well, in November of 2023, so a little over a year ago, New Mexico adopted, at the behest of Governor Lujan Grisham, a mandate that forces electric vehicles to be sold to the tune of 43% of new vehicles. That'll kick in here in New Mexico the summer of 2026. So we're really getting down to brass tacks here. We're talking about basically 18 months from where we sit right now. Something I was not aware of and didn't factor in is that RVs, recreational vehicles, are also going to have to adhere to this regulation. But I was reading an article from an industry publication, rvtravel.com, and it was a headline, November 7th, 2024, California, other states may soon ban motorhome sales. And I said to myself, well, I didn't think of that. Well, what the article goes on to say is that there is no recreational vehicle on the road today or even in development that is an EV. And if you don't have an EV model, you can't sell 43% of them to be able to sell the 57% that are not EVs. So California is actually first in line. They could be dealing with this here as soon as start of 2025. Washington, Oregon, and California are among the states that are moving down this path more quickly than New Mexico. And so folks in those three and a handful of other states could be out of luck if they try to buy a recreational vehicle within their state boundaries. Now, will that happen? Will California change things to make RV sales viable? I don't know. We know Gavin Newsom is not inclined to limit his government regulations to adhere to reality. And of course, what will that look like? The one other wild card is, of course, President Trump takes office in January here, and he could eliminate California's waiver under which they and other states like New Mexico have embraced these EV mandates. Will he follow through with that? I certainly hope so. It would help all these states out. Of course, those are all blue states that Trump, by and large, did not win. So on the other hand, Trump could say to himself, well, heck, I want to see these blue states suffer the consequences of their bad policy and not have to deal with Gavin Newsom yelling at him because he's helping Californians and California's economy survive by removing these EV mandates from them. So we'll see what President Trump has in mind. He's obviously got a long list of things that he's going to be wanting to look at when he takes office. Will he be able to save the RV industries in those three states, Washington, Oregon, California, or will he let them suffer? We don't know. We'll find out very soon, though. And of course, what New Mexico does or doesn't do in a few years starting in summer of 2026.
Right. I mean, I think that it's a great example or a great reminder that we are 50 different states, plus a few territories, but we're 50 different states working together. So some states will choose to go a direction with certain things. Some will be successful, some will not. The ones that fail will then turn to the states with good models, hopefully, to adopt the ones that are working, right? That's kind of a libertarian mindset. But we are 50 different states. So if California wants to go that route, and Washington and Portland or Oregon want to go that route, and it's incredibly successful, which we're obviously not seeing, Paul, but if it's incredibly successful, then that'll be a model for everybody, or they'll be the model of what not to do. So either way, that each state gets to choose what they want to do, and the people that live in that state are the ones that get to choose what they want to do by representing and electing the officials that are running it, which is a reminder to New Mexicans that if you're not happy, plan on voting in 2 years already. Paul, I guess that's really all that I have for you, or time I have for you this year, signing off for 2024. So I really appreciate you coming on. Go ahead and give all your websites and everything again so people can find you where you're at.
Yeah, go to errorsoфenchantment.com, riograndefoundation.org. And I know we'll be talking before the session kicks off, but we got a lot of information at both of those sites, including the votes that the legislators take or have taken over the years at riograndefoundation.org and our Freedom Index. So we'll talk again in 2025. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to you and your listeners, and we'll see you as we approach the legislative session.
Sounds good, Paul. Thank you very much, sir.
You're listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889.